Hey, y'all. This is the second and final bonus episode of the WTX podcast that we'll have for season one. If you've been listening for a while, this one's a little bit different than what you've been used to. The idea behind this one is a family-friendly holiday road trip episode that you can listen to while you're driving to family for the holidays or however you're spending your Thanksgiving or Christmas. This is the legend of Pecos Bill, and I hope it's something that your whole family will enjoy. You know, every culture has its larger than life heroes. The Greeks had Hercules, the English had King Arthur, and up in the northern forests, they talk about Paul Bunyan, the giant lumberjack whose footsteps supposedly shook the earth. But down here in Texas, we've got our own legend. A man who might not have been a giant, but he sure lived big. His name? Pecos Bill. Now, Pecos Bill wasn't just strong, he wasn't just brave. He was the kind of guy who could outwit a rattlesnake and wrestle a tornado, all while cracking jokes. The cowboys used to sit around their campfires swapping stories about him. They'd say, "Bill's everything a cowboy wants to be." He was fearless, tough as nails, and always ready for a challenge. And if you believe the stories, there wasn't anything he couldn't do. But where does a legend like Pecos Bill come from? Well, let me tell you. Pecos Bill was born into a family so big you'd need 2 hands and a few extra fingers to count all his siblings. His mother, she was tougher than rawhide. One morning before the coffee even boiled, she chased off a whole platoon of Santa Anna's soldiers with nothing but a broom. Davy Crockett was so impressed, he sent her a Bowie knife as a thank you, and all of her 18 kids cut their teeth on it, literally. The family lived way out on the West Texas frontier, 100 miles from anyone. But when a new neighbor moved in just 50 miles down the road, Bill's mom declared it was getting too crowded, so they packed up their covered wagon and headed even further west. 18 kids, 2 parents, a cow, and a mule, all squeezed together, bumping along over the prairie. Now, little Bill was just 4 years old. He liked to ride in the back of the wagon with his feet hanging off the edge. One day, as they crossed the Pecos River, the wagon hit a rock and Bill went flying into the sand. Before he could even yell, "Hey, wait for me!" the wagon was gone. By the time his parents realized he was missing, they were miles away. They searched and called for him, but it was no use. They never found Bill. But someone else did. An old coyote named Mai, wise as the hills, came across the boy. Mai sniffed him, tilted his head, and must have thought, "Well, you're a scrappy little thing." So he took Bill in and raised him as his own. Mai taught him everything he knew: how to find food, how to stay safe, and how to survive in the wild. Mai even introduced Bill to the other animals, asking them to look out for the boy. The bear offered to show Bill where the honey was. The wolf invited him to play with his cubs. Even the skunk promised to leave him alone, as long as Bill didn't tug on his tail. But not all the animals were friendly. The rattlesnake hissed, "Keep him away from me or he'll regret it." And the mountain lion? Well, let's just say Bill learned to steer clear of him. As Bill grew up, he didn't just survive, he thrived. The coyotes taught him to hunt, and he got so fast he could catch a jackrabbit without breaking a sweat. By the time he was a young man, he could outrun a roadrunner, bring down an antelope, and even wrestle a buffalo. He could climb mountains like a goat and leap from crag to crag without a second thought. But Bill wasn't just fast and strong, he was kind. If a coyote got a thorn in its paw or a porcupine quill in its nose, Bill was there to help. The coyotes loved him for it. At night, they'd all gather on the prairie, howling at the moon, and Bill would be right there with them, howling like he belonged. And maybe he did. For a long time, Bill thought he was a coyote too. For years, Pecos Bill ran wild with the coyotes, thinking he was one of them. He hunted, howled, and raced across the plains, never imagining he might be something else. But one day, everything changed. Bill was sitting on a rocky ledge looking out over the Pecos River when he heard something strange, the sound of hoofbeats. Curious, he moved closer and saw a man riding up the trail on a horse. Something about the man felt familiar, though Bill couldn't figure out why. The rider stopped, looked at Bill, looked away, pulled his hat up over his eyes, looked at him again for a long time, and finally shouted, "Bill, is that you?" Bill squinted. "Who wants to know?" "It's me, Chuck, your brother." The man climbed down from his horse and scrambled up to meet Bill. "I've been searching for you ever since you fell out of the wagon." Bill frowned. "Brother? Wagon? I think you got the wrong guy. I'm no man. I'm a coyote." Chuck laughed. "A coyote? You think you're a coyote? Boy, you're no more a coyote than I'm a prairie dog." Bill crossed his arms. "Oh yeah? I got fleas. I howl at the moon, and I can outrun a jackrabbit. If that don't make me a coyote, then what does?" Chuck grinned. "For starters, coyotes have tails. Look in the creek and see for yourself." Bill followed Chuck to the water and stared at his reflection. For the first time, he noticed his face wasn't like the other coyotes. No snout, no tail, just the rugged face of a man. He blinked and turned to Chuck. "Well, I'll be. Maybe you're right." "Of course I'm right," Chuck said. "Come on back to the ranch. You'll make a great cowboy. But you can't show up looking like that. And I didn't bring any extra clothes." Bill grinned. "If I'm going to be a man, I'll do it my way. Just give me a minute." Bill spotted a big steer grazing nearby. Its horns stretched 6 feet from tip to tip. Bill grabbed the steer by the tail, let out a loud holler, and scared it so badly it jumped right out of its skin. Don't worry, it planned on growing a new one anyway. Using the steer's hide, Bill made himself a jacket and a pair of boots, sewing everything together with a cactus thorn. Then he fashioned a pair of leather pants, what cowboys now call chaps. Chuck whistled. "Not bad. Now hop on my horse and we'll head to the ranch." Bill chuckled. "You ride your horse, I'll run. Let's see who's faster." And sure enough, Bill kept up with the galloping horse without breaking a sweat. As they continued, Bill almost stepped on the biggest rattlesnake he'd ever seen. 15 feet long with 30 rattles on its tail. The snake lifted its head and hissed, "Get out of my way, human. I warned Mai to keep you away from me." Bill smirked. "You don't scare me. Move, or I'll make you." The snake spat venom, hitting Bill right between the eyes. But Bill just wiped it off and said, "That's one strike. You got 2 more chances." The snake struck twice more, but its venom didn't even leave a mark. Bill finally grabbed it by the tail, whipped it through the air, and slammed it to the ground. "Had enough?" he asked. The snake hissed weakly. "I give up." "Good," Bill said, tying the snake around his arm like a whip. "You're coming with me." Chuck, watching from his horse, shook his head. "Bill, you're the strangest person I've ever met." A little further down the trail, the biggest mountain lion Bill had ever seen stepped out of the brush. It was twice the size of Chuck's horse. The mountain lion growled, "I've heard of you, Pecos Bill, and I'm going to make you my dinner." Bill grinned. "You can try." The mountain lion leaped, but Bill sidestepped and grabbed a handful of its fur. Every time the lion attacked, Bill dodged and pulled out more fur. Soon, the sky was full of fur, swirling like a dust storm. and the lion was almost bald, except for a tuft on its ears and chin. Panting, the lion whimpered, "Please, Pecos Bill, have mercy. Only if you let me ride you," Bill said. The mountain lion sighed and nodded. Bill climbed onto the mountain lion's back, using the rattlesnake as a whip. "Now, this is what I call a proper ride." When they reached the ranch, Bill rode in on the mountain lion like it was the finest horse in Texas. Chuck followed behind, shaking his head. The ranch hands froze, staring in disbelief. Chuck grinned. "Boys, this is my brother, Pecos Bill." Bill didn't wait for introductions. He walked straight to the campfire, grabbed the ladle of piping hot beans, and poured the scalding beans into his mouth. He then tipped the boiling coffee pot and drank it like water. The cowboys watched, wide-eyed. Finally, Bill wiped his mouth with a prickly pear and asked, "Who's in charge here?" A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. "That'd be me, but I reckon it's you now. Anyone who can ride a mountain lion and use a rattlesnake for a whip deserves the job." The cowboys all nodded in agreement. Bill grinned and sat by the fire. "Glad to hear it," he said. "Now, what do you all call yourselves?" Chuck laughed. "Oh, we got a nickname for everyone. You'll catch on soon enough." There was Beans the cook, famous for flipping pancakes so high they disappeared in the clouds before landing perfectly in the pan. Slim was so skinny he didn't even cast a shadow. Old Harmony could play tunes on his harmonica so sweet even the horses stopped to listen. Froglegs, with his bow-legged stance, made him hop like a frog. And Dapper Dan always dressed to impress, with shiny boots and a silver-studded belt. Bill laughed. "Well, guess I'll fit right in." And from that day forward, Pecos Bill and his new crew became the stuff of legend, with stories that would be told around campfires for years to come. Now, Pecos Bill wasn't the kind of man to settle for anything less than the best. For a while, he'd been riding that mountain lion he tamed, but it wasn't working out. The cattle got spooked every time they saw it, and honestly, Bill was tired of dealing with the mountain lion's bad attitude. One evening, sitting around the campfire, Bill asked the cowboys, "What's the best horse around here? I mean, the absolute best." The cowboys exchanged looks, and one finally spoke up. "Well, there's a horse folks call Lightning, fast as the wind, maybe faster. Some say he can outrun his own shadow. Others call him the Pacing White Mustang. And a few even claim his real name is Pegasus. But he's wild. So wild, no one's ever got close to catching him. We've been chasing him for years, and he leaves our fastest ponies in the dust." Bill leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You're wasting your time chasing him on horses. I'll catch him myself, on foot. Let's see if Lightning can outrun me." At first, the cowboys laughed, but when Bill grabbed his saddle and slung it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing, their laughter faded. He wasn't kidding. At sunrise, Bill set out, tracking Lightning across the open plains. When he finally spotted the horse grazing in the distance, Bill stopped. Lightning was breathtaking. His golden coat shimmered like sunlight, and his pure white mane and tail glowed like something supernatural. Bill had heard horses like this called palominos, but Lightning was something else. He looked like he'd been carved from pure energy. Without hesitation, Bill charged forward, and the chase was on. For 5 days and 4 nights, Bill chased Lightning across Texas. They raced through cactus-filled deserts, over rocky cliffs, and into deep canyons. Bill didn't stop, not to eat, not to rest. At one point, he had to toss his saddle because it was slowing him down. Now it was just Bill and his sheer determination. By the 5th day, Lightning finally slowed, his wild energy spent. He stopped at the edge of a wide plateau, pawing the ground and snorting. Bill walked up, hands on his hips, still catching his breath. "Well, you've got guts. I'll give you that. If you think you can ride me, go ahead and try. But I warn you, say your prayers before you do. Because you won't last long. Bill grinned. I've been saying my prayers since I was a boy. I believe I'm ready. He climbed onto Lightning's back, gripping tight with his knees and clutching the horse's ghostly mane. That's when the real test began. Bill hung on for dear life as Lightning kicked up so much dust, it formed the Monaghan Sandhills. Lightning bucked across New Mexico, finally rearing up on his hind legs and throwing himself backward, slamming into the ground so hard it pushed up the land around them, forming the Sierra Blanca Mountains. Lightning bolted into Arizona, galloping so fast it carved a massive trench into the earth, now known as the Grand Canyon. Pecos Bill clung to Lightning as he dashed down into Mexico, then up into Wyoming and Montana, and even Canada. When that didn't shake Bill off, he leaped a mile forward, then 2 miles backward, then straight up into the air. Bill found himself looking down at the clouds and stars, but he didn't let go. Lightning raced back south into Texas again, tearing through a grove of mesquite trees. The thorns ripped at Bill's arms and face, drawing blood, but Bill stayed firmly in place. Finally, in a last effort, Lightning spun in circles, bending the straight Rio Grande River into the winding shape it appears today. Then, finally, Lightning collapsed from exhaustion. Before Lightning could get back up, Bill scrambled onto his shoulders and held him firmly to the ground. That's enough fun, Lightning, Bill said. You're the best horse there is, and I'm the best cowboy. If you let me ride you, we'll become famous together. But the choice is yours. You're free to go or to stay with me. Lightning snorted, then let out a deep sigh and stood still. You've earned my respect, the horse said, and my loyalty. I'll stay with you, Pecos Bill. Bill stepped back and gave Lightning a choice to run, but the horse stayed, pressing his nose into Bill's hand like a promise. They went back and found the saddle Bill had discarded, and Lightning allowed him to saddle him. When they rode back into camp, the cowboys were speechless. From that day on, Lightning was Bill's partner and trusted friend. No one else could ride him, though some foolishly tried. One cowboy named Three Gun thought he'd sneak a ride while Bill wasn't looking. Lightning bucked him so hard, the ground split beneath him and water started gushing out, forming the namesake of Big Spring, Texas. After that, the Cowboys gave Lightning a new nickname, Widowmaker. But to Pecos Bill, he was simply the greatest horse who had ever lived. Pecos Bill wasn't the kind of man to waste time doing things the hard way if there was a smarter way to get the job done. He was always coming up with clever tools and tricks to make life out on the range easier, or at least more exciting. One of his most famous inventions, the lasso. The story goes that Bill got tired of chasing cattle with nothing but his bare hands. One day, he spotted an old steer grazing under the Texas sun, its hide tough as a pair of old boots. Bill walked right up to it, grabbed it by the tail, and let out a yell so loud it could have scared the horns off a longhorn. The poor steer was so startled, it jumped right out of its skin. Don't worry, though. Like the last one, according to Bill, the steer wasn't hurt. It was just ready for a new hide anyway. With that empty hide, Bill got to work. He cut it into long strips and braided them together, creating what would become the most famous lasso in cowboy history. The rawhide lasso was strong enough to pull a boulder out of a canyon, but light enough to carry without slowing Bill down. It didn't take long before every cowboy in the West wanted their own, but no one could use the lasso like Pecos Bill. While most cowboys struggled to rope a single steer at full speed, Bill could lasso a hawk out of the sky like it was nothing. He'd twirl his lasso a few times over his head, let it fly, and gently pull the bird back to earth, all while riding Lightning at top speed. But Bill didn't stop at hawks either. His lasso was so big and so accurate that he could catch an entire herd of cattle with one throw. If the herd scattered across the plains, Bill wouldn't worry. He'd just swing his lasso wide, circle them all in one loop, and pull every last steer back together. Easy as pie. But the most famous story about Bill's lasso happened during a terrible drought. The water tanks on the ranch were bone dry, and the cowboys were starting to panic. Bill stayed calm. He saddled up Lightning, grabbed his trusty lasso, and rode off toward the Rio Grande. When he got there, he twirled his lasso, flung it out, and caught a full mile of river in a single throw. Then, with Lightning running as fast as ever, Bill dragged that mile of water all the way back to the ranch. He filled every tank, trough, and barrel on the property. Bill pulled so much water out of the Rio Grande that it turned southwest Texas into the desert landscape that you'll find there today. There are plenty of wild stories about Pecos Bill, but one of the most famous is how he found his dog. This wasn't just any dog, no way. His was the first bulldog. Really. One quiet evening out on the range, Bill was lying on the grass, staring up at the stars while Lightning grazed nearby. Suddenly, he felt the ground shake. At first, he thought it was just the mountain lion snoring too loudly. But then the shaking turned into a rumble, and the rumble grew into a roar. Bill sat up. That noise wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from the ground. His herd of cattle was stampeding. He jumped on Lightning's back, grabbing his lasso. "Come on, boy," he yelled. "We got cattle to round up." Bill raced across the range, chasing the sound. Soon he spotted the herd in the distance, kicking up a dust storm so big it covered the moon. But as he got closer, he realized the cattle weren't running for no reason. They were being chased. And what was chasing them? Something Bill had never seen before. It was a bulldog, but not an ordinary one. This beast was the size of a steer, with shoulders as wide as a barn door, horns like a young bull, and sharp teeth that shone into the moonlight. Its bark shook the ground, and every time it growled, the herd ran faster. Bill knew they had to stop it. He swung his lasso over his head and let it fly, aiming for the dog's huge neck. But the dog was quick. It dodged the rope and charged straight at Bill, snapping its massive jaws just inches from Lightning's side. "You got some fight in you, don't you?" Bill muttered with a grin. "All right, let's do this the hard way." Bill rode Lightning toward a rocky ridge, leading the dog right into the trap. The bulldog followed, its growls booming like thunder through the canyon. When they reached the top of the ridge, Bill reared Lightning back and shouted, "This ends now." With one giant leap, Bill jumped off Lightning's back and tackled the bulldog in midair. They hit the ground so hard it split the ridge in two, creating Palo Duro Canyon. When the dust settled, Bill was sitting on top of the dog, holding its jaws shut with one hand and scratching its ear with the other. The dog let out a deep huff, its fiery eyes softening as Bill hit just the right spot behind its horns. "You got a lot of fight, big fella," Bill said, catching his breath. "But there's no reason to go chasing my herd like a wild storm." The dog wagged its massive tail and shook its back leg with joy as Bill kept scratching. "You know, you're not so bad for a bulldog," Bill added. "How about you come work for me? I'll give you plenty to do and all the steak you can eat." The dog let out a snort and wagged its tail even harder. From that day on, the beast was called Derecho, a name that fits its thundering bark and stormy spirit. Bill trained it to herd cattle, protect the ranch, and even take on a grizzly bear when needed. Derecho wasn't just a dog, he was a legend, just like his owner. Before Pecos Bill came along, ranching was a chaotic business. The cattle roamed free over open range, and there was no good way to tell which animals belonged to which ranch. Cowboys spent more time arguing over whose steer was whose than actually ranching. Pecos Bill decided enough was enough. There had to be a better way. One evening, while sitting by the fire with his dog Derecho, Bill got an idea. He picked up an iron bar and started bending it, using his bare hands like it was nothing more than soft Play-Doh. He twisted the end of the bar into a unique shape, a backward P joined to a B. He admired his work for a moment before chuckling. There we go. That's the crazy PB brand. Nobody's going to confuse my cattle now. The next morning, Bill heated the branding iron until it was glowing red hot. He glanced over at Derecho, who was stretched out by the fire. All right, partner, Bill said. Time to put this to use. Bill spotted a big steer grazing nearby and pointed it out to Derecho. Without hesitation, the half bull, half dog leaped to his feet and charged. The steer didn't stand a chance. Derecho grabbed it by the nose with its iron jaws and threw it to the ground like it weighed nothing at all. As Derecho held the steer steady, Bill pressed the hot branding iron against its hide. The sizzling sound was loud enough to make the other cattle stop and look. And when Bill pulled the iron away, the crazy PB mark was clear. From then on, Bill's ranch was known as the Crazy PB Ranch, and his cowboys as the Crazy PB Outfit. The branding system worked so well that Bill taught it to the neighboring ranchers too. Each one came up with their own unique mark, and every spring, the ranchers would come together for a big roundup. The cowboys would herd all the cattle from the area into one massive corral and then brand the calves to match their mother's marks. It was efficient, it was effective, and it saved everyone a lot of arguments. Now, not every cowboy had a dog like Derecho to help, but they figured out other ways to handle the steers. Some of them even tried to imitate Derecho's bulldogging technique. Riding at full gallop, a cowboy would leap off his horse, grab a steer by the horns, and wrestle it to the ground. It was an impressive stunt, no doubt, but it was mostly for show. And eventually, exhibitions like this became what we know as the rodeo. But when it came to the real work of branding, most cowboys stuck to their lariats. Pecos Bill always said, "You don't have to be flashy to get the job done, but it sure don't hurt." Thanks to Pecos Bill and Derecho, branding has now become a cornerstone of ranching life. Once, Pecos Bill did the impossible. He roped a tornado. It all started one cold, quiet Christmas Eve. The cowboys were gathered in the ranch house for supper, and Bill looked out the window and saw trouble. A giant, funnel-shaped black cloud was racing toward the ranch, with fierce winds tearing up everything in its path. Bill jumped to his feet and shouted, "The only way to save the ranch is to lasso that cyclone." The other cowboys stared at him in shock. "You can't do that, Bill. Not even you can rope a cyclone." But Bill didn't listen. He grabbed his lasso, hopped on Lightning, and rode straight toward the storm. As the massive funnel cloud swirled above him, Bill spun his lariat high over his head and tossed it, catching the cyclone in one perfect throw. For a moment, it looked like he had won, but the cyclone wasn't giving up that easily. It pulled hard, dragging Lightning toward the edge of a cliff. Bill knew he had to act fast. He slid down the rope, leaped off Lightning, and climbed onto the swirling tornado itself. The wind howled and whipped Bill back and forth as the cyclone tried to throw him off, but Pecos Bill held on tight. As the storm raged across the land, it flattened everything in its path. One giant forest on a high cliff was completely wiped out, leaving behind a flat, endless stretch of grasslands. People would later call this place the Llano Estacado. The cyclone spun wildly, turning green as it sucked up leaves and trees. Bill was tossed this way and that, barely holding on. And just when it seemed like the storm might get the best of him, Derecho came charging in. The bulldog leaped up and tackled the cyclone, wrestling it to the ground like it was a stubborn steer. With Derecho's help, Bill finally tied the cyclone up and flipped it upside down so it couldn't suck up anything else. When the storm settled, the upside down cyclone, covered in leaves and branches, looked kind of like a tree. That gave Bill an idea. He tossed his lasso high into the sky and started pulling down stars, red giants, white dwarfs, yellow dwarfs, one after the other. One by one, he hung the stars on the tree until the sky was almost empty. He left just one star up there, deciding Texas needed its own special star. That star became what we now call the Lone Star of Texas. Bill dragged the decorated upside-down cyclone back to the ranch and set it up inside. The cowboys were amazed. They placed the gifts they had bought for each other underneath it. And that's how the first Christmas tree was born. Pecos Bill had a way with people, especially the ladies. They all loved his charm, his quick wit, and the way he could spin a lasso or glide across the dance floor like a whirlwind. But as much as he laughed and danced, no one ever truly caught his eye until he met Sue. Now, Sue wasn't just any girl. The first time Bill saw her, she was riding down the river on the back of a catfish so big it could have been mistaken for a whale. She looked as free and happy as a Texas breeze, and Bill fell for her right away. But Sue wasn't just about making an impression. She could ride, dance, and cook better than anyone Bill had ever met. She could spin so fast on the dance floor, it'd make your head spin. And her cooking, it was so good that Beans, the camp cook, nearly quit after tasting it. Bill wasted no time asking her to marry him. But Sue wasn't going to say yes that easily. "Bill," she said, "it's kind of you to ask, but how do we know this is real? Maybe you just think you love me because I can ride, dance, and cook." "No, Sue," Bill said honestly. "I love you because you're kind and strong, and I'd love you just as much if you couldn't do any of those things." Sue smiled, but wasn't ready to make it that easy for him. "All right, Bill," she said. "If you really love me, let me ride Lightning. No one but you has ever ridden that horse. If you trust me enough to let me try, I'll know it's true love." Bill hesitated. Lightning wasn't just any horse. He was wild, dangerous, and unpredictable as a thunderstorm. "Sue," Bill said, "I'd do anything for you, but Lightning isn't safe. He could throw you before you even had a chance to hold on. Please, ask me for anything else." But Sue shook her head, tears in her eyes. "If you can't trust me with your horse, Bill, then maybe you don't really love me." Now, Bill had faced outlaws, tornadoes, and stampeding herds, but he couldn't handle seeing Sue cry. Against his better judgment, he gave in. "All right, darling," he said with a sigh. "On our wedding day, you can ride Lightning." Bill hoped he'd have time to talk her out of it before the big day, but Sue was just as stubborn as she was sweet. When the day came, she wouldn't listen to anyone. The whole town came out for the wedding. People traveled for miles, and even the preacher looked nervous when Sue reminded Bill of his promise. "Bill," she said, "you told me I could ride Lightning." For the first time in his life, Bill felt afraid. Slowly, he led her to the corral where Lightning was waiting. The golden white horse snorted and pawed the ground, his coat shining in the sunlight. Bill saddled him carefully, adjusting the halter. Sue's family begged her to change her mind, and the crowd murmured nervously. But Sue wouldn't back down. With a confident smile, she waved to everyone, climbed onto Lightning's back, and gave him a gentle pat. The second she touched him, Lightning exploded into motion. He bucked, twisted, and leaped higher than a tree. Sue held on for a moment, but then Lightning gave one last mighty kick. Sue flew off his back and up, up, higher than the clouds. She soared into the sky until she disappeared. The crowd gasped, and Bill ran to the fence. But Sue wasn't coming back. She had been thrown all the way to the moon. The townsfolk begged Pecos Bill to rope her and bring her down, but she wouldn't let him. She was too scared to fall that far. And so Sue stayed on the moon, where you can still see her today, Look closely during a full moon, and you might see her silhouette. Sometimes she looks sad, bent over like the day she was thrown. Other times she looks happy, like she's made peace with her new home. Pecos Bill was never the same after that. Every night he'd sit by the fire and stare up at the moon, wishing he could join her. As the years went by, the West began to change. Ranches became farms, fences divided the open range, and cowboys started using wagons and even automobiles. The world moved on, but Bill stayed behind. No one knows where Pecos Bill is now. Some say he's dead, but old cowboys know better. Whenever they gather around a campfire, another story about Bill comes to life. Maybe he's out there somewhere, running a new ranch far away from the fences and noise of the modern world. But even though the world has moved on, Pecos Bill hasn't been forgotten. His stories remind us all to dream big, live free, and never be afraid to take on the impossible. Thanks for listening to the WTX podcast. I'm Jody Slaughter. I hope you and all your family have a happy Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. And we'll see you all back again in 2025.